The Stranger's Warning ****. In the ancient land of Ethoria, where floating islands dotted the skies and rivers of liquid light flowed through the valleys, there was a prophecy that had been whispered for generations. It spoke of the eternal flame, a force of unimaginable power that could either save the world or destroy it. The flame had been sealed away eons ago, hidden deep within the forbidden mountains, guarded by the keepers, ancient beings of immense power. The story begins in the quiet village of Eldermere, a small settlement nestled at the edge of the Whispering Woods. Here lived Kale, a young blacksmith with a peculiar gift. His hands could craft weapons and tools that seemed to hum with a life of their own, though he never understood why. Kale's life was simple, filled with the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal and the warmth of the forge. But everything changed one fateful night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, a stranger arrived in Eldermere. He was cloaked in tattered robes, his face hidden beneath a hood, and his presence sent a chill through the air. The villagers watched in silence as he made his way to Kale's forge, his footsteps eerily silent. "The flame stirs," the stranger whispered, his voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "The chosen one must rise, or all will be consumed." Before Kale could question him, the stranger placed a strange emblem in his hand, a circle with a flame at its center, and vanished into the night. Kale stood frozen, the emblem burning in his palm. He felt a strange energy emanating from it, as if it were alive. Shaking off his unease, he returned to his forge, but sleep eluded him that night. Visions of a great flame and a towering mountain haunted his dreams, and a dark figure laughed in the shadows, its eyes glowing with malice. The next morning, the village was abuzz with rumors of the stranger's visit. Some believed it was an omen of doom, while others dismissed it as the ramblings of a madman. But Kale couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something terrible. That night, the village was attacked. Of Eldermere, the attack came without warning. Shadows twisted and writhed at the edge of the village, and from them emerged the voidlings, creatures of pure darkness, their glowing red eyes piercing the night. They moved with terrifying speed, their forms shifting and contorting as they descended upon Eldermere. Kale grabbed his hammer, the only weapon at hand, and rushed to defend his home. The villagers fought bravely, but the voidlings were relentless. Their claws tore through wood and stone, and their eerie screeches filled the air. The village was soon engulfed in flames, the once peaceful streets now a battlefield. Amid the chaos, Kale stumbled upon an ancient anvil hidden beneath the rubble of his forge. As he touched it, a shard of glowing crystal emerged, pulsating with a fiery light. The shard seemed to call to him, and when he grasped it, a surge of energy coursed through his body. His vision blurred, and he saw visions of a great flame, a towering mountain, and the dark figure from his dreams. When the vision faded, Kale found himself standing amidst the ruins of Eldermere, the shard glowing faintly in his hand. The voidlings were gone, but so was everything he had ever known. The village was destroyed, and the few survivors looked to him with a mixture of fear and hope. Determined to uncover the truth behind the shard and the prophecy, Kale set out on a journey that would change the fate of Ethoria. His first ally came in the form of Lyra, a skilled archer with a sharp tongue and a sharper aim. She had been tracking the voidlings and recognized the shard as a piece of the eternal flame. "If the flame is awakening," she warned, "then we're already too late to stop it. But maybe we can control it." Together, they ventured into the Whispering Woods, where ancient trees whispered secrets of the past. Here, they encountered Garrick, a grizzled warrior who had once served in the armies of Ethoria. Garrick had his own reasons for joining their quest. A personal vendetta against the dark sorcerer Malachar, who sought to claim the flame for himself. As they journeyed deeper into the woods, they were ambushed by a pack of voidlings. The battle was fierce, but Kale's newfound powers, unleashed by the shard, gave them the edge they needed. With each strike of his hammer, waves of fiery energy erupted, scattering the creatures. But the victory was short-lived, as a massive voidling emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and writhing like liquid darkness. The battle pushed them to their limits, but with Lyra's arrows and Garrick's brute strength, they managed to defeat the creature. As it dissolved into smoke, a voice echoed in Kale's mind. "The flame awakens, and the chosen one must rise." With the shard's power growing stronger, Kale knew that their journey was only beginning. The path ahead would be fraught with danger, but he was determined to uncover the truth about the eternal flame and his own destiny. Of shadows after their harrowing battle in the Whispering Woods, Kale, Lyra, and Garrick continued their journey toward the heart of Euphoria. The shard of the eternal flame pulsed faintly in Cale's hand, its light growing stronger with each passing day. The group knew they were being hunted, not only by the Voidlings but also by Malakar's agents, who sought to claim the shard for their dark master. Their path led them to the City of Shadows, a sprawling metropolis built into the side of a massive canyon. The city was a hub of trade and intrigue, where merchants peddled exotic goods and thieves lurked in every alley. It was also rumored to be a haven for those who sought knowledge of the ancient world, knowledge that Cale desperately needed. As they entered the city, they were met with wary glances. The people here were distrustful of outsiders, and the group's weapons and armor marked them as adventurers, or targets. Cale kept the shard hidden, but its energy seemed to attract attention. Strange figures watched them from the shadows, their eyes glinting with curiosity or malice. Their first stop was the Hall of Records, a towering library said to hold the secrets of Euphoria's past. The librarian, an elderly man with a long white beard, eyed them suspiciously but agreed to help when Cale showed him the shard. "The eternal flame," the librarian whispered, his voice trembling. "It has been centuries since anyone has spoken of it." He led them to a dusty tome, its pages filled with ancient symbols and maps. The book spoke of the flame's creation, its sealing, and the prophecy of its return. It also mentioned the keepers, the ancient beings who guarded the flame, and their last known location, the Temple of Embers deep within the Forbidden Mountains. But before they could learn more, the library was attacked. Assassin's blade. The attack came swiftly and without warning. Dark-clad figures burst into the Hall of Records, their blades gleaming in the dim light. They moved with deadly precision, cutting down anyone who stood in their way. Cale and his companions fought back, but the assassins were skilled and relentless. In the chaos, the librarian was struck down, his last words a warning. "Beware the Shadow Cabal. They serve Malakar." Cale grabbed the ancient tome, and the group retreated into the labyrinthine streets of the city. The assassins pursued them, their movements silent and deadly. The chase led them through narrow alleys and across rooftops, the city's towering spires casting long shadows in the moonlight. Lyra's arrows found their marks, and Garrick's brute strength kept the assassins at bay, but their numbers seemed endless. Cale's shard flared to life, its fiery energy repelling their attackers, but the effort left him drained. Finally, they found refuge in an abandoned temple, its walls covered in faded murals depicting the eternal flame. Here, they regrouped and tended to their wounds. Cale studied the ancient tome, deciphering its cryptic clues. The Temple of Embers was their next destination, but reaching it would not be easy. The Forbidden Mountains were a treacherous place, filled with deadly creatures and ancient traps. As they prepared to leave the city, a new ally emerged from the shadows, a rogue named Selene, who claimed to have information about Malakar's plans. She was cunning and elusive, her motives unclear, but Cale sensed that she could be trusted, for now. To the Forbidden Mountains with Selene's guidance, the group left the City of Shadows under the cover of night. The road to the Forbidden Mountains was long and perilous, winding through dense forests and across barren wastelands. The shard's light grew brighter as they drew closer to their destination, its energy humming in Cale's veins. Along the way, they encountered strange phenomena: floating rocks, rivers that flowed uphill, and creatures that seemed to be made of pure energy. The land itself seemed alive, reacting to the shard's presence. Cale's powers continued to grow, but so did the strain on his body. The shard was both a blessing and a curse, its energy threatening to consume him. One night, as they camped beneath the stars, Cale was visited by another vision. He saw the Temple of Embers, its towering spires reaching into the sky. He saw the keepers, their forms shimmering with light, and he saw Malakar, his eyes burning with dark fire. The vision ended with a warning: the flame must not fall into the wrong hands. The next day, they reached the edge of the Forbidden Mountains. The peaks loomed before them, their jagged silhouettes cutting into the sky. The air was thin and cold, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. But Cale knew that they had no choice. They had to reach the Temple of Embers before Malakar did. As they began their ascent, they were ambushed by a pack of voidlings, their forms larger and more menacing than any they had faced before. The battle was fierce, but Cale's shard unleashed a burst of fiery energy, scattering the creatures. The victory was hard-won, and the group was left battered and exhausted. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the fate of Euphoria rested in their hands. The Temple of Embers was within reach, and with it, the secrets of the eternal flame. But they were not alone. Malakar's forces were closing in, and the final battle was drawing near. Sent to the Temple of Embers, the Forbidden Mountains loomed before Kale and his companions like a wall of jagged teeth, their peaks shrouded in dark clouds. The air grew thinner with every step, and the cold bit at their skin. The path to the Temple of Embers was treacherous, filled with crumbling cliffs, hidden crevices, and the ever-present threat of Malakar's forces. As they climbed higher, the shard in Kale's hand pulsed with increasing intensity, its light cutting through the gloom. The group moved cautiously, their senses on high alert. Selene, the rogue who had joined them in the City of Shadows, scouted ahead, her keen eyes spotting traps and ambushes before they could spring. The first major obstacle came in the form of a massive chasm, its depths lost in shadow. The only way across was a narrow, crumbling bridge that swayed dangerously in the wind. Garrick tested the bridge's stability, his heavy frame causing the ancient stones to groan. "This won't hold for long," he muttered. "We need to move quickly." One by one, they crossed the bridge, their hearts pounding with every step. Just as Kale reached the other side, the bridge gave way, collapsing into the abyss. The group watched in silence as the stones disappeared into the darkness, a stark reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. As they continued their ascent, they encountered strange carvings etched into the rock, symbols of the Keepers, the ancient guardians of the eternal flame. The carvings told a story of sacrifice and duty, of beings who had given everything to protect the flame from those who would misuse its power. Kale felt a growing sense of responsibility, knowing that he was now part of that legacy. But their journey was far from over. As night fell, they were ambushed by a group of Malakar's elite soldiers, shadowy figures clad in black armor, their eyes glowing with malevolent light. The battle was fierce, the soldiers' dark magic clashing with Kale's fiery energy. Lyra's arrows found their marks, and Garrick's brute strength turned the tide, but the soldiers were relentless. The end, Kale unleashed a burst of power from the shard, its light driving the soldiers back. But the effort left him weakened, his body trembling from the strain. "We can't keep this up," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to reach the temple before Malakar finds us." Temple of Embers. After days of grueling travel, they finally reached the Temple of Embers. The temple was a marvel of ancient architecture, its towering spires reaching into the sky like fingers of flame. The air around it shimmered with heat, and the ground was warm to the touch. The shard in Kale's hand blazed with light, its energy resonating with the temple's power. As they approached the entrance, they were met by the Keepers, ethereal beings of light and fire, their forms shifting and flickering like flames. The Keepers spoke in a language older than time, their voices echoing in Kale's mind. "You have come far, chosen one," they said. "But the path ahead is fraught with peril. Are you prepared to face the trials of the flame?" Kale nodded, his determination unwavering. The Keepers led them into the temple, its halls filled with glowing runes and ancient artifacts. The air was thick with magic, and the walls seemed to pulse with life. At the heart of the temple was the Chamber of the Flame, where the eternal flame had once burned. But the chamber was empty, its central pedestal cracked and lifeless. The Keepers explained that the flame had been divided into shards to prevent its misuse, and Kale's shard was one of 3. The other 2 were hidden in dangerous locations, guarded by powerful creatures and ancient traps. Before they could learn more, the temple was attacked. Malakar's forces had followed them, their dark magic clashing with the temple's light. The battle was chaotic, the temple's halls filled with the sounds of clashing steel and roaring flames. Kale and his companions fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. In the chaos, Malakar himself appeared, his form wreathed in shadow. He was a towering figure, his eyes burning with dark fire. "You cannot stop me, boy," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "The flame will be mine, and this world will burn." Kale stood his ground, the shard's light flaring to life. "I won't let you destroy everything," he said, his voice steady. "The flame belongs to the world, not to you." For the flame, the battle between Kale and Malakar was fierce, their powers clashing in a storm of light and shadow. The temple shook with the force of their blows, its ancient walls cracking under the strain. Kale's shard burned brightly, its energy fueling his attacks, but Malakar's dark magic was relentless. Lyra, Garrick, and Selene fought to hold off Malakar's forces, their movements swift and precise. But the enemy's numbers were overwhelming, and the temple's defenses were crumbling. The Keepers joined the fight, their fiery forms cutting through the darkness, but even they were struggling to hold back the tide. As the battle raged, Kale realized that he couldn't defeat Malakar alone. Drawing on the shard's power, he unleashed a massive burst of energy, its light engulfing the chamber. Malakar was thrown back, his form flickering like a dying flame. But the effort left Kale drained, his body on the verge of collapse. In that moment, the keepers spoke again. "The flame must be reunited," they said. "Only then can its power be fully unleashed. But beware, the cost will be great." Kale knew what he had to do. With the last of his strength, he placed the shard on the pedestal, its light merging with the temple's energy. The chamber was filled with a blinding light, and the ground shook as the flame began to awaken. But before the process could be completed, Malakar struck. His dark magic shattered the pedestal, and the shard was sent flying. The temple began to collapse, its walls crumbling around them. Kale and his companions barely escaped, the temple's ruins falling into the mountainside. As they stood amidst the wreckage, Kale knew that their journey was far from over. The flame was still divided, and Malakar was more dangerous than ever. But they had gained something invaluable, the knowledge of where the other shards were hidden. The final battle was drawing near, and Kale would need all his strength and courage to face it. Of the abyss. With the Temple of Embers in ruins and Malakar's forces scattered, Kale and his companions regrouped at the base of the Forbidden Mountains. The battle had taken its toll. Kale's body ached from the strain of using the shard's power, and the group was battered and exhausted. But they had no time to rest. The keepers had revealed the location of the second shard, the Abyssal Depths, a sunken city hidden beneath the ocean. The journey to the coast was fraught with danger. Malakar's shadowy agents pursued them relentlessly, their attacks growing more frequent and desperate. Kale could feel the dark sorcerer's presence growing stronger, his malevolent energy seeping into the land. The Eternal Flame's power was awakening, and time was running out. When they finally reached the coast, they were met with a sight that took their breath away. The ocean stretched out before them, its waves crashing against the cliffs with a thunderous roar. In the distance, a massive storm brewed, its dark clouds swirling ominously. The abyssal depths lay beneath those waves, guarded by ancient creatures and treacherous currents. To reach the sunken city, they needed a ship and a crew willing to brave the dangers of the deep. Their search led them to a port town called Seabreeze, a place where sailors and adventurers gathered to trade stories and supplies. Here, they met Captain Rin, a grizzled seafarer with a reputation for daring voyages. Rin was skeptical at first, but when Kale showed him the shard, his eyes widened with recognition. "The abyssal depths," he muttered. "I've heard the tales, but no ship has ever returned from those waters." After some persuasion, and the promise of a hefty reward, Rin agreed to take them. As they set sail, the storm grew closer, its winds howling like a beast. The ship rocked violently, and the crew struggled to keep it afloat. Kale stood at the bow, the shard in his hand, its light cutting through the darkness. He could feel the second shard calling to him, its energy resonating with his own. But the journey was far from easy. As they entered the storm, they were attacked by a massive sea creature. A leviathan with scales as black as night and eyes that glowed with an eerie light. The creature's roar shook the ship, and its massive tail sent waves crashing over the deck. In city, the battle with the leviathan was fierce and chaotic. The creature's massive form loomed over the ship, its jaws snapping at the crew. Lyra's arrows struck its thick hide, but they barely seemed to scratch the surface. Garrick swung his axe with all his might, but the creature's scales were like iron. Kale knew they needed a different approach. Drawing on the shard's power, he unleashed a burst of fiery energy, the light striking the leviathan's eyes. The creature roared in pain, its massive form thrashing in the water. With one final strike from Garrick, the leviathan retreated into the depths, its dark form disappearing beneath the waves. The storm began to subside, and the ship emerged into an eerie calm. Before them lay the abyssal depths, a sunken city of towering spires and crumbling ruins, its structures covered in coral and seaweed. The water was unnaturally still, and the air was thick with an ancient, oppressive energy. Using a small rowboat, Kale and his companions made their way to the city, their movements slow and cautious. The shard's light guided them through the labyrinthine streets, its glow reflecting off the water. But the city was not uninhabited. Strange, shadowy figures moved in the depths, their forms shifting and writhing like the voidlings. As they reached the heart of the city, they found the second shard, a glowing crystal embedded in a massive, ancient altar. But before they could claim it, they were ambushed by Malakar's forces. The dark sorcerer had anticipated their move, and his soldiers were waiting. The battle was intense, the narrow streets of the sunken city providing little room to maneuver. Kale's shard flared to life, its energy clashing with the soldiers' dark magic. Lyra's arrows found their marks, and Garrick's brute strength turned the tide, but the soldiers were relentless. In the chaos, Kale managed to reach the altar and claim the second shard. As his hand closed around it, a surge of energy coursed through his body, merging with the first shard's power. The city began to shake, its ancient structures crumbling into the water. Escape with the second shard in their possession, Kale and his companions fought their way back to the rowboat, the city collapsing around them. The shadowy figures in the water grew more aggressive, their forms lunging at the group with terrifying speed. Kale's shards flared to life, their combined energy repelling the creatures. But the effort left him drained. As they rowed back to the ship, the storm returned with a vengeance. The waves towered over them, threatening to swallow the small boat. Captain Rin and his crew fought to keep the ship steady, their faces pale with fear. When Kale and his companions finally reached the ship, they were met with a mixture of relief and awe. But their ordeal was far from over. The Leviathan returned, its massive form rising from the depths with a deafening roar. The creature's eyes burned with fury, and its tail slammed into the ship, sending splinters flying. Kale knew they couldn't defeat the creature. They needed to escape. Drawing on the combined power of the shards, Kale unleashed a massive burst of energy, the light striking the Leviathan and driving it back. The ship's sails caught the wind, and they raced away from the storm, the creature's roars fading into the distance. As the storm subsided and the sun broke through the clouds, Kale looked at the two shards in his hand. Their light was brighter than ever, their energy humming with power. But he knew that the final shard and the final battle awaited them. The journey was far from over, but Kale felt a renewed sense of determination. The Eternal Flame's power was within reach, and he would do whatever it took to protect the world from Malakar's darkness. The final shard with two shards of the Eternal Flame in their possession, Kale and his companions set their sights on the final shard. According to the keepers, it was hidden in the Obsidian Citadel, a fortress of dark magic built by Malakar himself. The citadel was located in the heart of the Blighted Lands, a desolate wasteland corrupted by Malakar's influence. The journey to the Blighted Lands was perilous. The land was barren and lifeless, the sky choked with ash and smoke. Strange creatures roamed the wastes, twisted abominations born of dark magic. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the shards in Kale's hand pulsed with a warning light. As they approached the Obsidian Citadel, they were met with a sight that filled them with dread. The fortress was a towering monolith of black stone, its spires reaching into the sky like claws. Dark energy crackled around its walls, and the ground trembled with each step they took. Malakar's forces were waiting for them. The citadel's gates were guarded by an army of shadowy soldiers, their eyes glowing with malevolent light. Kale knew that a direct assault would be suicide. They needed a plan. Celine, the rogue, suggested a stealthy approach. Using her knowledge of traps and hidden passages, she led the group through a series of underground tunnels that bypassed the main gates. The tunnels were dark and narrow, filled with the bones of those who had tried and failed to infiltrate the citadel. As they emerged into the citadel's lower levels, they were met with a new challenge: Malakar's experiments. The halls were filled with grotesque creatures, hybrids of flesh and shadow, their forms writhing and shifting unnaturally. The group fought their way through, their movements swift and precise. Finally, they reached the chamber where the final shard was kept. The room was filled with dark energy, the air thick with the scent of decay. The shard was embedded in a massive black crystal, its light struggling to break free. But as Kale reached for the shard, Malakar appeared. Confrontation. Malakar's presence filled the chamber, his form wreathed in shadow and dark fire. His eyes burned with malice, and his voice was like the rumble of thunder. "You are too late, boy," he sneered. "The flame will be mine and this world will burn." Kale stood his ground, the two shards in his hand flaring to life. "I won't let you destroy everything," he said, his voice steady. "The flame belongs to the world, not to you." The battle that followed was unlike anything Kale had ever experienced. Malakar's dark magic clashed with the shard's fiery energy, the force of their blows shaking the citadel to its foundations. The chamber was filled with light and shadow, the air crackling with power. Lyra, Garrick, and Celine fought to hold off Malakar's minions, their movements swift and precise. But the dark sorcerer's power was overwhelming. With a wave of his hand, he sent Kale flying across the room, the shards slipping from his grasp. As Kale struggled to his feet, he realized that he couldn't defeat Malachar alone. Drawing on the shard's power, he unleashed a massive burst of energy, the light engulfing the chamber. Malachar was thrown back, his form flickering like a dying flame. But the effort left Kale drained, his body on the verge of collapse. In that moment, the keepers appeared, their forms shimmering with light. "The flame must be reunited," they said. "Only then can its power be fully unleashed. But beware, the cost will be great." Kale knew what he had to do. With the last of his strength, he placed the two shards on the black crystal, their light merging with the final shard. The chamber was filled with a blinding light, and the ground shook as the eternal flame began to awaken. Eternal flame, the obsidian citadel trembled as the eternal flame's power surged through its walls. The dark energy that had corrupted the fortress was purged, replaced by a brilliant fiery light. Malachar screamed in rage, his form dissolving into shadow as the flame's power consumed him. But the victory came at a cost. The flame's energy was too much for Kale to contain. His body began to glow, the light spreading through his veins. He could feel the flame's power merging with his own, its energy threatening to consume him. The keepers spoke again, their voices filled with sorrow. "The flame must have a vessel," they said. "To save the world, you must become one with it." Kale knew what he had to do. With a final, determined breath, he embraced the flame's power, his body dissolving into light. The chamber was filled with a blinding glow, and the ground shook as the flame's energy was unleashed. When the light faded, Kale was gone. In his place stood the eternal flame, its light burning brightly in the heart of the citadel. The land began to heal, the blighted lands transformed into a vibrant, thriving landscape. Lyra, Garrick, and Celine stood in silence, their hearts heavy with loss. But they knew that Kale's sacrifice had saved the world. The flame's light would guide them, a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. As they left the citadel, the sun broke through the clouds, its light bathing the land in warmth. The journey was over, but Kale's legacy would live on, a testament to courage, sacrifice, and the enduring power of unity.